Almost overnight, she went from a possible witness to a person of interest in the case of a missing mom of 5 from New Canaan. The girlfriend in the middle of a bitter and brutal divorce battle.
Stuff you were throwing out, we have. And it's all Jennifer. It belongs to Jennifer. Do you understand?
Turned high-profile murder investigation.
What happened to Jennifer McLaughlin?
We're taking you inside the trial of Michelle Troconis.
And thanks for joining us once again for Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. I'm Shannon Miller. We are heading into the second day of the defense's case. It comes after removing final witness for the prosecution. The 88-year-old mother of Jennifer Farber-Dulos took the stand. Gloria Farber told the jury her daughter was a devoted mother who would never miss out on her children's birthdays. She hasn't seen or spoken to Jennifer since May of 2019. The defense called its first witnesses, including 3 people who were at a dinner party with Fotis Dulos at the Farmington property the night before Jennifer disappeared. They testified that generally there was nothing out of the ordinary that night. And when it was the state's turn to cross-examine, the witnesses were grilled with pointed questions. Michelle Troconis has pleaded not guilty to all of the charges she faces and continues to maintain her innocence, even as she faces a contempt hearing after the defense rests its case. NBC Connecticut's Kevin Geis is live for us once again at Stamford Superior Court. And Kevin, a lot of important testimony yesterday. Let's start with Gloria Farber. It's the first time we have ever heard from her speak publicly about Jennifer. And tell me just about the feeling in the courtroom during that moment.
Right, Shannon, absolutely. Good morning. It was an impactful moment when Gloria Farber took the stand, of course, in the trial against the woman accused of conspiring to murder her daughter. Now, Gloria Farber's testimony was short, but gave some insight into the relationship she had with her daughter. She reiterated to the jury what the nanny, Lauren Almeida, already testified about earlier in the trial, that Jennifer had doctor's appointments in the city on May 24th, 2019. She was supposed to meet Gloria at her home in New York City and from there take the children to their own appointment.
Now, was Jennifer supposed to come to your apartment to meet you and the children there?
Yes.
Did Jennifer show up at your apartment that day?
No.
Have you seen your daughter Jennifer since she failed to meet you at your apartment in New York City on May 24th, 2019?
No.
Have you spoken to her on the phone since that day?
No, I have not.
Have you gotten any emails or text messages or any communication from your daughter since that
No.
day?
The 5 Dulos children were also present in court with Farber since their mother's presumed death. Gloria Farber has been in charge of raising and taking care of them. But when she was alive, Gloria says Jennifer was always there for her children.
Between 2006 and 2019, did Jennifer ever miss one of her children's birthdays?
Never.
And was Jennifer always there for them?
Yes, she was always there.
And as of now, 2024, do you have custody of the 5 children?
I do.
And since May 24th, 2019, have any of the children ever seen or spoken to their mother?
No.
Between direct examination and cross-examination, this testimony was incredibly brief. It only lasted about 10 minutes in total. Shannon.
All right, Kevin, and you were in the courtroom when Gloria Farber testified. Talk about the moment when she walked into the courtroom with the 5 Dulos children and what was happening while she was on the witness stand. More on just kind of the mood of that moment.
Right, so when the state called Gloria Farber, sort of the entire courtroom turned toward the door of the courtroom. And before she even entered the room, the 5 Dulos children came in first. They sat with the friends and family of Jennifer Dulos that have been present for the majority of this trial. Of course, a big emotional moment that sort of had a lot of impact. And then Gloria Farber took the stand. It was so quiet you could hear a pin drop on the carpet floor inside that courtroom. And of course, everybody inside that courtroom was hanging on just about every word she said. Despite the testimony being so short.
And Kevin, Attorney John Schoenhorn also kept his cross-examination of Gloria Farber brief. He asked her if they had had any contact the morning that Jennifer disappeared.
Did you attempt to contact her that morning?
No.
Did you have her phone number at the time?
Of course.
Do you recall what that number is today?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
I have no further questions.
So, Kevin, any idea here what Schoenhorn was getting at with that phone number question?
Right. So the defense earlier in the trial continued to point out that her phone connected, or allegedly her phone connected to her Chevy Suburban early in the afternoon after Jennifer Dulos was alleged to have already disappeared. So defense attorney John Schoenhorn sort of continues to just tie that phone to Jennifer Dulos, but then also trying to sort of continue to bring up that sort of rogue connection that happened in the early afternoon that we haven't gotten a big explanation for yet. Just sort of pushing toward reasonable doubt for the jurors.
Well, once the prosecution rested its case, Kevin, defense attorney John Schoenhorn filed a motion for acquittal. He argued the charges against his client, which include conspiracy to commit murder, tampering with evidence, hindering prosecution, and conspiracy to commit evidence tampering, should all be tossed out. He argued the state failed to offer sufficient evidence to tie Troconis to any crime.
Half of what I just heard is speculation upon speculation upon speculation.
The court is not required to assess the strength of the evidence. The court is just required to determine whether or not there is enough evidence to go to the jury.
Judge Randolph found there is enough evidence to go to the jury on those 6 counts, so he denied the motion. Now, the defense kicked off their case with the owner of the Avon Pond where Fotis Dulos went water skiing with his children. Michael Haynes, who goes by Hutch, testified that he met Fotis Dulos back in 2005 when he became a member of his small private water skiing club. Haynes told the jury about when Jennifer left Fotis and took the Dulos children. He testified that Fotis was upset and that the children were his life. Haynes also says Fotis frequently told him he expected to regain custody of his children.
He was definitely devastated when he didn't have his kids skiing, so I think he was excited that he was making progress, and he felt like he was making progress, and he definitely said he thought he would have them at the pond a lot more. Prior years, he didn't have them down there at all, and I think he thought he was going to be able to get shared custody and be able to spend weekends with them skiing, and even, sometimes during the week.
Now, Robert Hutch Haynes spoke about how Jennifer rarely went to the pond. It was the nanny, Lauren Almeida, who brought the kids to water ski, and when she testified back on January 16th, she implied that because it was Fotis that wanted it, not the kids.
You had mentioned that the children did like to water ski, however, correct?
They water skied.
Okay. Did they not like to water ski?
They water skied a lot. So I saw times where they didn't want to, but still had to.
Haynes also told the jury about having dinner at Fotis's Farmington home for Jefferson Crossing the night before Jennifer disappeared. The party was hosted by Fotis Dulos and Michelle Troconis. Haynes and his wife attended, along with another couple, Stephen Reich and Beth Johnson, who is now engaged to Reich and uses his last name. The Reichs told the court yesterday that Hutch Haynes' wife was not called on the stand to testify. Haynes says at dinner that night he noticed Fotis had a shorter haircut, and there were some members of his club who had shorter hair as well for water skiing purposes.
Were you surprised at all about his haircut?
Not really. It was, going from long to short is always a different look, but I wasn't surprised. I didn't think anything of it.
So a common thing for those water skiers, because they said that the water tend to get in their face if they had long hair. You might remember Dulos' neighbor of 9 years testified that he didn't recognize Fotis because of that haircut. Haynes says there was nothing out of the ordinary about the dinner or the night, but on cross-examination, attorney Michelle Manning turned up the heat.
Did you discuss the plans to murder Jennifer the next morning at the dinner party?
Say that again?
Did you discuss the plans did Fotis Dulos and Michelle Troconis discuss the plans to murder Jennifer at the dinner party on the 23rd?
No.
Did they discuss with you at the dinner party to dispose of evidence of the murder in the garbage cans of Albany Avenue?
No.
Brown.
Argumentative.
Now, that objection, as you heard, overruled, and the witness responded no. And Kevin, similar questions were asked to each witness called that attended that party. So how did they all respond to that direct question by Attorney Manning?
Yeah, they offered basically the exact same answer, just no, that they did not discuss any of the plans regarding the alleged murder of Jennifer Dulos or any disposal or destruction of evidence. The Reichs were also questioned about sort of that dinner party, and they continued to talk about how normal the evening seemed in total. But then, of course, we also heard later on Beth Reich conceded that there, in retrospect, sort of how normal that evening was did seem a bit strange, but only years after she heard news reports and what was going on.
In hindsight, what sticks out to me is the dichotomy of the positivity of that evening and what subsequently occurred.
So she continues to say that nothing during that evening necessarily seemed out of the ordinary, but in retrospect, of course, knowing what she knows now, the sort of sense of normalcy was definitely unnerving later on. Shannon.
Kevin Haynes also testified about when police searched the Avon water skiing pond back in June of 2019. This was the view from Drone Ranger. Investigators were looking for either Jennifer's body or any sort of disposed evidence, anything in connection with where she could be. Haynes told the jury all about the media attention at the pond and got emotional when talking about the impact of the police search.
Our pond it's sacred ground to us. We have 30 people in our club that love that place. And the state police come in with dogs, and they search the place with dogs, and then they put a boat in the water, and they go over the whole pond with a boat looking for a body. It was awful.
And it obviously still is upsetting for you.
Yeah, no, it was probably one of the most painful times of my life.
Haynes described that as a family environment there, that water skiing pond. He said that he cooperated fully with the investigation. On cross-examination, Attorney Manning asked him to elaborate on that emotional statement.
And that was the worst experience of your life? Them searching for...
It was an awful experience. It was an awful experience.
Yes, awful experience searching.
The whole thing's an awful experience.
Of course. You watching the pond being searched for a dead body of a mother of 5 was awful for you. We understand that.
Sustained.
So, Kevin, here we got a first look at how Attorney Manning handles cross-examination, the state asking those very sharp questions of Fotis' friends. Now, she also honed in on how close of a friend Hutch was to Fotis Dulos. Talk more about that.
Right, so we know based on his testimony that the two were very close. They spent a lot of time at the pond together. They were both very passionate about water skiing. So this was a chance for the defense to sort of bring in a witness who was very close to Fotis Dulos back in 2019. And of course, the cross-examination by the state trying to poke some holes into their relationship, how deep their relationship was, and sort of what they would talk about and why they were invited to that dinner party, things of that nature. So we're continuing to sort of learn from direct witnesses and friends of Fotis Dulos, sort of his mindset, sort of in that early phase of 2019.
Kevin Geist, live for us once again outside Stamford Superior Court. We appreciate your insight as always, and we will check back in with you tomorrow. The defense also called Michelle Troconis' hairdresser to the stand yesterday. Attorney John Schoenhorn asked Cheryl Breery about Michelle's demeanor during their appointment the day after Jennifer disappeared.
Michelle is always happy. She's just a positive person. I never see her mad or anything like that. She's just always uplifting. She lifts other people up.
Let's talk about May 25th, 2019.
Okay.
That day.
Okay.
Was there anything unusual about her behavior that day?
No.
An update now on the timing of the case. You may remember on Tuesday, Judge Randolph said the contempt hearing would be held after the defense rests, pushing back closing arguments. He said the case could go past March 1st, but on Wednesday, after the defense said it could rest Friday or Monday at the latest, the judge said it appears they may be back on track time-wise for the jury to begin deliberation by March 1st. We also learned that the defense plans to call Mike Rose to the stand, who was Fotis Dulos' divorce attorney at the time. Patrick Jennings, an attorney representing Rose, stood before Judge Randolph and asked him to quash that testimony because the communication between Fotis Dulos and his attorney was privileged and confidential. He also pointed out that attorney-client privilege remains in effect in most cases, even after a client's death.
And it is our position that the content of his communications and interactions with Mr. Dulos are squarely fall within the protections of the attorney-client privilege.
He's going to only be testifying the events time-wise surrounding the production and the review of certain documents, particularly the Dr. Herman report by Mr. Dulos and Mr. Rose, without getting into their communications.
Now, Schoenhorn brought up the testimony by attorney Michael Meehan, the guardian ad litem for the Dulos children, representing their legal best interests. Schoenhorn said Rose's testimony would be limited in the same way as Meehan and not fall under attorney-client privilege. Judge Randolph said while the court isn't inclined to quash attorney Rose's testimony, Randolph would allow Jennings and his team to draft a protective order which could limit testimony if the judge agrees to grant it. Rose didn't testify on Wednesday, so we'll have to see how this plays out in the trial. Still much more to come on Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. We have more analysis with Jim Bergen. Up next, we'll talk about the suicide note that Fotis Dulos left. It came up for the very first time in the trial. And welcome back to Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. We are joined once again by attorney Jim Bergen, who has been providing us analysis all throughout the trial in this crucial time here. Jim, thanks so much for being here once again today.
Good help.
Jim, late in the day yesterday, attorney John Schoenhorn started calling some of the Farmington police officers to the stand. The first was an evidence officer, Jeffrey Glod, who is responsible for logging in and logging out evidence-found property and making sure court forms are filled out. On May 13th, 2020, he testified he received an evidence envelope from a state police major crime detective, and the defense asked him to bring that envelope and its contents with him to court.
It was in connection with Mr. Dulos' suicide. It's listed as Exhibit 0390, handwritten note.
Now, next, the defense called the officer who responded to the scene of Fotis Dulos' suicide. But the prosecution objected to testimony about the suicide note, and the jury was then excused. Schoenhorn argues the note exonerates Michelle Troconis. Judge Randolph decided not to allow the suicide note to come in as evidence, saying it doesn't meet the measure of trustworthiness. A judge did allow Schoenhorn to show the death certificate, though, of Fotis Dulos. Now, while it wasn't admitted in court, we obtained Fotis Dulos' suicide note back in 2020. The part attorney Schoenhorn is referring to is here, where it says, I want it to be known that Michelle Troconis had nothing to do with Jennifer's disappearance. So, Jim, the legal arguments here are a bit tough to follow, but could you explain the dying declaration exception and why the judge felt that this note really didn't fit that?
Well, an actual trial is supposed to get at the truth. We don't allow hearsay normally because you can't cross-examine the person who said it. And cross-examination is considered to be the engine of truth. So we do have exceptions. And one of those exceptions, the judge was very sophisticated on this. I was impressed. The judge notes that the exception of allowing in a dying declaration is because when it's offered, it's typically offered by a victim. And that person who admits to something, it's against that person's interest. The judge carefully looked at this and said, wait a minute, this guy wasn't going to go to jail. So his statement was made in anticipation of his suicide. So at the time he made it, it wasn't against his interest. So in a very hyper-technical and accurate sense, you can't let it in. Good for the defense to try.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's the law.
And of course, the note says, again, Michelle Troconis does not have anything to do with Jennifer's disappearance. So this is something, that the defense could have said, look, like it totally exonerates, their client. Is it a challenge now that the jury won't be able to see this?
I don't think it's that big a deal. I mean, it would have been interesting that it comes in, but if they believe that she's a co-conspirator, all that is a co-conspirator saying, hey, don't get my buddy. That's not really that powerful in the first place. But it's worth the try. I think the judge got it right. That's not happening anymore.
We should mention, too, he also says that Michelle Troconis and Ken Mawhinney had nothing to do with this as well. Let's talk about Gloria Farber's testimony and the impact of that moment inside the courtroom. She knew her daughter arguably better than anybody. Her testimony lasted less than 10 minutes and was limited to the day that Jennifer disappeared. So what do you think is the reason behind the prosecution keeping that testimony brief? And do you think her testimony had the impact that the state was hoping for?
Well, the answer to the last question is easy. It did have the effect they wanted. Now, I've spoken quite a lot about this trial has 3 aspects. 2 are really not appropriate. They're allowed, but they really don't fit. The 3 aspects are, let's vindicate this woman, this mother of 5. Let's support her. The second aspect, let's validate this extraordinary work of the police. And the third, and the only actually appropriate, relevant part of this trial is what was going on. Is Michelle Troconis a criminal? What was going on in her mind? So what happens here when they put the mother on, with the 5 kids coming into the courtroom, it's obviously, really making us feel horrible about Jennifer, but that's really not supposed to be what governs the case.
And a delicate dance for Attorney John Schoenhorn, of course, with that witness coming in. How did you think that he handled this cross-examination?
Well, most lawyers, good lawyers even, are just not known as sweethearts. It's not easy for them to come across the way I think most of us would like to come across. And so I thought he did not bad, but like most of these other lawyers, he's just not a sweetheart. So it just seemed a little rough, not in any of the questions, but just the whole dynamic was not warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, there was, again, a lot of weight there in that moment, it seemed like, on both sides of the questioning. Jem, we appreciate this and much more analysis coming up with Attorney Jim Bergen next. You're watching Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. Welcome back to Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. We are back once again with Attorney Jim Bergen. Let's talk now about Prosecutor Michelle Manning. Getting to her cross-examination, the witnesses, of course, the defense is starting to bring to the stand. I want to play here another example of her cross-examination. Take a listen here.
Do you remember Fotis ever saying something to you about Jennifer having left in the past and he expected that she would show up? Effect on the hearer listener, Your Honor.
Well,
then it's irrelevant.
Well, this is not going to be a street corner argument.
Again, that question coming from Attorney Felsen, and Manning then, issuing an objection to that. What do you think is working here for her?
For who now?
For Michelle Manning.
Michelle, the prosecutor. Well, honestly, she's staying on the theme that I've told you really doesn't belong in the case, which is this poor Jennifer. And so she's banging it, and it's displaying confidence in her theme, so she's on theme, so I guess that's okay. It is problematic for someone who understands the law that when you do that, you're maybe offending some people, and you're definitely not helping the trial itself. And the judge used the word gratuitous, and he did it like a school teacher.
Yeah. It's really been interesting to see, again, how things kind of shift and how the state is now taking these witnesses and wanting to know ahead of time, who are these witnesses and why are they coming to the stand? And then Attorney John Schoenhorn saying, we want to make sure that we're playing by the same rules here because we got, that information from the state when they were giving their side of the case. Jim, we've got a couple days left here for the defense to bring more witnesses to the stand. How do we wrap things up? And to clarify here for folks, it is natural, again, we've got just a couple seconds left, for the state to take more time and then for the defense to really wrap things up in a trial, correct?
Always. The state has the burden of proof. Many good defense lawyers don't even put on a case. They just cross-examine witnesses. And that's kind of almost how the Constitution has it all set up. Mm-hmm. He did bring in witnesses so far, and those witnesses are on the theme. They had no clue. And, of course, they're not somebody who Fotis was working on. Like, we know Fotis was working on Michelle from the day he met her until the end. So for her to actually be told anything seems just far-fetched.
Wait to see if more of the testimony from the defense speaks to that point of potentially what Fotis Dulos could have been telling Michelle Troconis throughout all of this. Jim Bergen, we appreciate all of your insight once again. That wraps up our exclusive Inside the Trial Michelle Troconis streaming special. Thanks for watching.